So it was advertised for 4:30 for the reading, so it's 4:20. We might want to wait a few minutes for the people who actually read the directions on the posting.
Oh, you want us to leave and come back?
No, don't leave and come back. But huge thanks to Joy for hosting. And make sure you buy wonderful coffee and goodies. She's the best. If you've not had her lemonade, she squeezes the lemons herself. It's really yummy. I don't know. You're all friends and I love you, and so it's a little bit different than a regular poetry thing when it's mostly people that I know only from poetry. And at poetry we have a trust that's built up and everyone is very supportive, but I also know you guys are all super supportive, and so there's nothing to fear here. Even if I did get a little jittery, but it's really a thrill, and a huge thank you to David for saying, have you ever thought about this? We can do it, because it's just really special to have done it.
I thought it was really great that you put yourself out there to do this. It's really cool.
Thank you.
Really happy to be here.
So, for those of you who know me from dancing, I see 3 different sets of dancers. I see contra dancers, I see folk dancers, and I see Scandinavian dancers.
Tap dancer.
Yes, but I'm not a tap dancer, so she's not really my tap dance community. But she's my market community, and I have garden community, and I have potluck community, and I have poetry community, and so it's an amazing interweaving of people, and I'm just super honored to be here today. This is the result of basically a lifetime. I started writing as a kid, trying to figure out life, trying to figure out a lot of hard stuff, because life is tough no matter who you are. And then, of course, we all went through COVID together, and so we know all the pain and loss that hits us on so many different levels. And yes, this is a little bit of a sad book. It's about loss and mourning, but it's also, I hope, a hopeful book. Are we getting close to 4:30?
Yeah.
Okay, so where do I begin? And I have to take my glasses off to read because I chose near vision when I had my cataract surgery. So, although this is my first book, this poem in the book is one of the first things I had published. It's called The Sun Spends All Day Setting. The fairest day of autumn called me out to work again. So I was in the garden, planting next year's iris, when an old forgotten woman stopped to say hello to me. She told me of the summer years when she was young and free. Tomorrow, I will look for her and listen to the wise and wonderful stories of summer days and other times. But one day, I will look for her, and she will be gone, for the sun spends all day setting when September passes on. I was living with my grandmother at the time, taking care of the garden, out on a busy street in Portland, and the garden makes people stop and talk to you. There's something that resonates so very, very deeply, and it's young people, old people tell me about their mother's gardens, their grandmother's gardens, their grandfather's gardens, gardens in Germany, gardens in South America, gardens in Vietnam, and it's a joy to find myself hearing so many beautiful, beautiful stories. As I was putting this together, I had plenty of poems to pick from, but there was one piece that it was only a couple of little tiny verses, and I had written it when I was 21, I think, about a kid that went to my church, and he had killed himself, and so it kind of leapt out and said, "You need to be finished." Elegy for Stephen. Stephen Drake, the path you take goes further than tomorrow. You feared to tread the path ahead, and now we walk in sorrow. Your short life was filled with strife, with bullies and with pain. At church and school, where no one cool would sit and be your friend. I know too well the lonely hell that made you take your life. The many years of doubts and fears as sharp as any knife. It's hard to cope with fear and hope when there's no real choice. And adults say, you'll find your way, but no one hears your voice. Their empty words were bitter shards, and now you've gone for good. And adults cry and wonder why you could not wait for God. Stephen was 17. My first real experience of loss, though, wasn't a person. It was my home in California. We moved before I turned 6, and it was a very hard move for a 6-year-old to understand. And we left behind my first garden and a life that was really quite beautiful. So, Eve's Lament. I seek a trace of that half-remembered place of infinite grace, of high arching branches and tall oak trees. The smell of the leaves and the hum of the bees and the song of tree frogs and summer breeze. I long have mourned the beans and the corn and the crookneck squash and the tender peas. Oh, the red-brown earth that laughed with mirth when I sank in the mud to my skiddy knees. There were ducks and goats and kittens and hosts of snails and spiders and busy bees, too drunk to sting on the rosemary flowers where I played for hours in summer and spring. I flew on the swing far over the tops of the houses and coops and kittens and crops till the moon looked fringy in the high tree tops. As only one born in the Garden of Eden, I know the heartache and loss of heaven, and banished to deserts of asphalt and money, I longed for the land of milk and honey, the birthright of every child born. I seek the embrace of that half-remembered place, from which all of us once were torn. So my life now is sort of a rebuilding of that early beauty and a finding of joy. And it's funny, as much as I was bullied, as hard as childhood was, even in childhood, I knew it was going to be okay. And here's something that I wrote in middle school called Wings. I used to be young and happy, but now I feel old and sad. I used to be here, but now I'm gone. I used to be held to the ground, but now I can fly. I used to be in a dark valley, but now I am on a mountaintop. I hope that no child ever has to write words like that. Here's another from a little later. Silently I cry, my anguish unknown, to those outside who have thoughtlessly sown the seeds of my sorrow. Deep, deep within, how could they know? How could they know that all that they see is trying to hide, that the real me has tried and tried? Now rejected I cry. Silently, silently, I cry. I hid a lot of tears because when you cry you get bullied more. And so in a lot of ways, writing this and compiling this has been a way of releasing and acknowledging all of those losses and hurts and resolving them and finding healing. So it's part of why the title is All the Tears I Have Not Shed. These words stand in for that I missed many, many times. And also come from a poem that was inspired by one of the other poets in the monthly group here. All the tears I have not shed. Rain falls like the tears I have not shed. Winter storms in anguish for the child I was. Virga, never touching the ground, like tears wiped off my cheek by a lover. Spring rains of piercing joy for every smile, every flower, every dance, every kitten, every child. The first rain in June, when the dry earth soaks up the drops, like the Spirit receiving a holy blessing. And when the sun bursts forth and makes a rainbow, I remember that every tear falls on the fertile ground of my soul. So I didn't really make a plan here. So I'm not really quite sure what to do next. Maybe one for Dale. So this one's a little bit poignantly funny. I call it plumbing the depths of grief.
Oh
no. Digging up the past, I found my resentment next to a leaking valve in a hole in the ground. A valve, cross-threaded on one side and connected on the other by a rubber splice held together with band clamps. I don't remember the argument that this configuration surely provoked, but my back and knees and shoulders remember digging the hundreds of feet of trench that preceded it. Grief springs up like a leak, wishing I could say, "I told you so." Becomes a flood when I meet someone who still doesn't know that he has been gone how many years. Asking, they instantly regret the pain they think they have caused. But if time does not ease all pain, at least it gives me a chance to fix the leaks. And any of you who knew Dale and knew how he fixed things understand every bit of that. And he came by it legitimately from both his mother and his father, who, as children of the Depression, never threw anything away and fixed things with baling wire and whatever they had on hand. And maybe a more serious one now. COVID has been such a hard time, and losing Dale like I did at the start, I didn't have time at first to process it because we were all just surviving. And it's really hard to deal with grief when you're surviving. It's really hard to be able to stop and mourn when you have to figure out from day to day how you're gonna pay the bills and how you're gonna get your crops to market or whatever it is that you do. But eventually there came a time when things quieted down and I did begin to process and found that it was far more than just Dale. It was far more than just the people I had lost in COVID. I lost an uncle and my brother-in-law, and I found myself really going back to the beginnings. And throughout it, I was seeking counseling, and that was a good process for what it's worth. But if you've ever done counseling, some of the things that they have are way off base. And there was a worksheet that she gave me called The Tasks of Mourning. And so this poem is called The First Task of Mourning from that worksheet. And it's Task 1, accept the reality of the loss. After death, it's common that the reality of the situation is minimized or denied. To complete this task, The reality of the loss must be fully accepted, both intellectually and emotionally. Copyright Therapist Aid LLC from the worksheet Tasks of Mourning. And if that isn't like the most heartless...
Right?
And she didn't actually even give it to me until like 2 years after Dale had passed. So but one of the things that I feel strongly about with counseling and with therapy is that no matter how good or how bad the therapist is, it's your job to figure out how they can serve you. And you can always find something that they are skillful at. And I have been able to do that. And I took this worksheet, and from it, I got gold. The first task of mourning. The first task of mourning is to touch the fur of the cat that has died and know that she has changed beyond understanding. The first task of mourning is to leave the only home I have known and move to a strange house in a strange garden in a strange city. The first task of mourning is to be called out of class in 3rd grade when Grandma Honey dies and say goodbye to her body that has changed beyond understanding. The first task of mourning is to touch the earth and plant a new garden. The first task of mourning is to choose not to go to the funeral. The first task of mourning is to watch the garden grow. The first task of mourning is to stand on the porch and look at the cloud rising up where the mountain once stood and know that even the earth can be changed beyond understanding. The first task of mourning is to rake the leaves when they fall. The first task of mourning is to live with Grandma Ruth after Granddaddy dies and learn to listen to her stories. The first task of mourning is to call 911 when I come home from work and find her unresponsive. The first task of mourning is to suddenly know, as they talk me through finding her pulse, that she is gone, changed beyond understanding. The first task of mourning is to call my mother and get a busy signal because someone already saw the ambulance in front of Grandma's house. The first task of mourning is to watch my father tenderly sweep his mother's hair back from her face and cover it with the blanket. The first task of mourning is to sleep. The first task of mourning is to wake up. The first task of mourning is to go to the funeral. The first task of mourning is to move away from the strange city and get married and make a new garden. The first task of mourning is to look up his cancer diagnosis and know that even if he kicks the cancer, he is going to die. The first task of mourning is to go to medical appointments. The first task of mourning is to make our wills. The first task of mourning is to take him to the New Year's contra dance, knowing it will be his last. The first task of mourning is to watch the ambulance take him away, knowing that thanks to COVID, I will not see him again. The first task of mourning is to go to the nursing home and hold his hand that has changed beyond understanding. The first task of mourning is to know with all the fibers of your being that to be alive truly is also to be subject to death, and we will all one day be changed beyond understanding. So the cloud I saw from the porch was Mount St. Helens. in second grade. And it was pretty frightening and amazing all at once. And yeah, the earth is all tied up with everything. But in the ashes, the gardens grew more magnificent than they ever had. The time with my grandmother was very, very special, and I am so, so grateful that I had it. So I've dedicated the book for all those who have gone beyond understanding, most especially my grandmothers and great-grandmothers, and for the earth whose bosom has received all our tears, and who has the power to transform them into blessings beyond measure. For if water is life, then tears are doubly sacred. There's a few more in there, but I'll let you discover them yourselves.
Awesome. Hey.